something was off. I knew that my mental health was not okay. I knew that I needed to get back on my medication because that's something that I've always been aware of. So with migraine, after I started topiramate, I remember for the longest time I had suicidal thoughts. And for me, that was normal. Even as a kid, I was very much aware of the fact that my brain says this is way too much pain. I want it to stop. So it's not about I want to die. It's about I want it to stop. And the pain was a lot of things. It's physical pain. It's also emotional pain. It just felt like a struggle to get through life. And that kept happening. And with the medication, it kind of helped when I was on antidepressants. And I always used to go back to the doctor and say, this is not helping and that's not helping. And it did not, at that point of time, I was not able to get any sort of help. I couldn't convince my GP to believe me. And I tried to go to the hospital and ask for help. They sent me home with Tylenol. I tried to explain it to my husband. I tried to explain it to everybody. Nothing helped. I called the suicide hotline. I said, this is happening to me. And this is one time when I'm in so much pain. And I feel so alone that I don't know if I'll be able to resist the thoughts. And they said, tell me your plan. It is essentially, tell me your plan. And I broke down. That is when I broke down. I didn't know what else to do. Nobody believed me. And that led to me choosing to overdose and thinking, I just want this to end.
Mm. And then who found you? What happened? After years of chronic pain, denied treatment access, and pain minimization by her healthcare professionals, today's guest hit rock bottom. She felt completely alone. Her mental health suffered, and it reached a point where she believed her family would be better off without her. She had lost the energy to fight and the will to live. And it's an awful position to be in, yet not as uncommon as you might think among people with migraine. Welcome to our new series, Me versus Migraine, in which we dive into compelling stories of real people battling this disease. In each episode, you'll take away insightful nuggets to make living with migraine a little easier and less painful. I'm Paula K. Dumas, producer of the Migraine World Summit and editor-at-large at Everyday Health and Migraine Again.
And I'm Carl Cincinnati, founder of the Migraine World Summit and director of operations at Migraine and Headache Australia. In just a minute, you'll meet our friend Shruti. We're going to go deep and get real about migraine and mental health. We're going to hear about her struggle with PTSD, depression, anxiety, and her suicide attempt last year.
But first, we need to warn you, as Carl said, that this topic can be traumatic and triggering for some people, which is not our intent. We've included a number of important mental health and suicide prevention hotline numbers in the show notes for this episode, and we would encourage you to use them if you are feeling uneasy or at risk. We'd also like to thank the sponsor of this episode, Amgen, a company that strives to serve patients with therapies that have the power to restore health or save lives.
On the surface, Shruti's story isn't that different from many others. She's struggled with migraine most of her life, navigating school, work, motherhood, and just triggers. Originally, she's from India, and now as a resident of Canada, Shruti is a tireless advocate for people with migraine. She works alongside us at the Migraine World Summit and also manages her very insightful Instagram account, Chronically Meh.
Oh, I love Chronically Meh, and I follow it. You know, she's always putting these clever illustrations about life with migraine and mental health that really hit the nail on the head. Now, when she's not writing, Shruti spends time with her family and young daughter. And what she's learned from hitting rock bottom might just help you pick yourself up again, right when it feels like the walls are closing in and no one really seems to care. Shruti, welcome to Me versus Migraine.
Thank you so much, Paula. It's a pleasure to be here.
Shruti, before migraine took an iron grip over your life, can you tell us what kind of a student and person you were?
Feels like a dream. I was a very outgoing person. I was a child. So I was the top of my class, always getting 100% on all my exams. I was a singer. I was a dancer. I used to paint. I used to do everything indoors. I was not a fan of extracurriculars outdoors, but I was a teacher's favorite, very annoying classmate. That way, I was a leader. And it's just, I remember everybody saying that I was brilliant, and I can feel it. I was. I could visualize a lot of things. My logic was off the charts. I had a photographic memory. That's something that got affected. But I was just a happy kid, and never really thought about the future. It was just about, I want to make a difference. That was always there. But I was amazing.
It would be awesome if we could all be those happy-go-lucky kids again, right? But then migraine. So once migraine set in, what happened? How did it begin interfering with your day-to-day life?
As an overachiever, which looking back, that's what I was, it was hard for me to accept that something was going wrong. And I was too young, so I was feeling a lot of different symptoms. It started off as abdominal migraine, which was very hard to articulate. So one day I tell my mom I have stomachache. The next day I'd say I'm feeling dizzy. The next day I'd say, something's not right. I'm not able to explain what's happening within me. So my mom took me to every doctor between the ages 6 and 13, gastroenterologist. I was talking about my vision. So we went to check out my eyes. We did everything and we couldn't really figure it out. So with every doctor, they just say, nothing's wrong with her. She's completely fine. Maybe she's just trying to get out of school. And that started impacting me in a way. I was questioning myself. Am I actually feeling all these things? Am I pretending? If I'm pretending, then why am I feeling it? And when I was preoccupied with all these things, I could feel that I had to work harder in school. I had to work harder with communicating and socializing with other people. And I just was not ready to accept that maybe I was falling behind somewhere. So I just kept working harder at it and just trying to meet whoever I thought I was, just try to compensate for it. So I didn't accept it until very recently, in fact.
And this was happening while you were at school. Were you in high school or primary school? Like approximately what age was this?
It started, my earliest memory is when I was in first grade. So I remember going home so many times because I started having a lot of tummy symptoms, and I'd go home, I'd sleep it off, I'd be fine. But first grade to 7th, I was having various symptoms, and then the headache started hitting. Around 6th and 7th grade, my headache started hitting. And that was very hard for me. But I'm that kind of person who pushes through. Even though I complain of pain, I don't want people to think I'm any less because of it. And I was all pumped up. I got a rush from being the best. And I didn't want anything to compromise that. So I ended up pushing myself over and over and over again. And after 7th grade, it started going downhill.
That sounds eerily familiar, I've got to say. The idea of getting that rush from excelling at something. And so you push through. And we've heard that same kind of story actually from, celebrities and athletes and advocates who are all, really good at something. And they keep pushing through, despite the fact that their health is suffering.
Yeah. My doctor recently told me that I was telling him, this is the time that I noticed, 7th grade, that my memory was failing. I was not able to remember things very well. Like I could remember everybody's phone number, their birthdays, every number that was related to them. I could remember everything that I'd read, everything that I'd seen. And suddenly I couldn't. Suddenly I had to actually pay attention in class and study for an exam, which I'd never done. Up to 7th, I never studied for an exam. My mom would be behind me saying, hey, you have an exam tomorrow, sit, study. But I've never had to because I just remember. And he said, your brain is so occupied with pain all the time. And the more you push through, instead of resting, if you push, then it has to work that much harder to do everything else. And in the end, something falls through the cracks. And that's what eventually happened. So you break down, you burn out. My burnout was a little prolonged because even though I realized something was wrong at 7th grade, I couldn't stop pushing myself until 2018. when I completely burned out. I just couldn't think anymore. I couldn't think about going to work anymore. I couldn't visualize my future anymore. So if somebody asked me, what do you want to have for lunch? I couldn't tell you. I couldn't decide. And I'm still recovering from it. I don't think I've completely recovered, but it was a scary time.
So you mentioned that you kind of were completely burnt out decades later, in 2018. What kind of an emotional state were you in?
Well, it happened much earlier, a decade earlier. So I finished my graduation in 2011 and I started working immediately. And I noticed that I had a pattern. I would work for 7 months and then quit and take off for 5 months. And then again, I'd pick another job, start again from the bottom, work for 7 months and quit. So every time I quit, that was when I was burning out and I couldn't think anymore. My migraine attacks were so intense that I couldn't sit in the office. The lights, everything bothered me. I'd be snapping at people. And I didn't want anybody to think I was any less, good at my job. I just wanted to excel regardless of what. And because I could not let that go, I just kept going up and down, up and down, up and down. And finally, at the last job that I had, I burned out earlier, and I wanted to quit earlier. This was again 10-month mark because I worked myself to the ground. I'm a workaholic that way. And I didn't let myself stop. I said, I love doing what I'm doing. Right now, I've finally gotten onto the top of my field. If I quit now, I'm not going to get this back. Again, I have to start bottom up. And I pushed myself for 2 years after I burned out, which was not good for me. And then I crashed. Then it felt like I probably don't have a future. I can't think about anything else after this. And thankfully for me, I was moving to Canada. That gave me an opportunity to take a break. I don't think I would have taken a break otherwise.
So you moved to Canada a couple of years ago, and shortly after you're in Canada, something pretty tragic occurred. You had a suicide attempt, and you attempted to self-harm. Can you tell us what happened and what led up to that?
I went off my medication in 2017, end of 2017, because I was planning to get pregnant. I was diagnosed with anxiety and depression when I was diagnosed with migraine. So they always said that my doctor has this written in her notes and I have it. She said, stressed personality. She's a stressed personality and that's why she has migraine. So I was on antidepressants before. And after I went off, again, I had my daughter. I wasn't okay in India. I knew that. When I moved here, it was a complete change, right? Completely different atmosphere. I was alone, didn't have any friends. My husband was quite busy. I had to manage everything by myself. The weather was a huge trigger for me. So I was in constant pain. And the thing is with migraine, people who don't have it can't understand you. So for me, my family actually did not understand. And that made me feel so alone. Second, I went to the GP and tried to get medication. I said, I went off medication 2 years ago. Now I want to be back on it. He said, you don't have migraine, you're just stressed.
Oh my gosh. So you got the same answer in Canada that you got in India, that you were just stressed. It was all in your head.
Yeah. But in India, I had the migraine diagnosis. I was on medication. I had proof for it. My GP refused to believe me. He refused to refer me to the neurologist. And I was in pain constantly. My neck would hurt or I would usually snap. I'm irritable.
Let's take a look at what the experts have to say about ways to save money and appeal insurance decisions when managing migraine.
I think people have to be very aggressive with their insurance company, for lack of a better word. I think they have to call their insurance company and say, I saw Dr. So-and-so's neurologist, a headache medicine specialist. He referred me to so-and-so. Will you cover this? And here are the codes. And I think you really have to question them. And if they say no, I think you have to go back to them. I sometimes I don't take most insurances. And I've had many patients referred to me by local docs and headache specialists from all around. And I will often call the insurance company and request that they be seen, in particular people who can't afford treatment very well. And many times it'll be approved. It's an arduous process. The clinician needs to talk to them, and the patient needs to be their own advocate.
So, Shruti, what kind of impact did this have on your relationship with your husband? Did he understand what you were going through?
He didn't. He didn't know what to think because this was not in his experience. And it's very hard for anybody to understand what's not in their experience. And I found it very hard to communicate as well. I just knew that something was off. I knew that my mental health was not okay. I knew that I needed to get back on my medication because that's something that I've always been aware of. So with migraine, after I started topiramate, I remember for the longest time I had suicidal thoughts. And for me, that was normal. Even as a kid, I was very much aware of the fact that my brain says this is way too much pain. I want it to stop. So it's not about I want to die. It's about I want it to stop. And the pain was a lot of things. It's physical pain. It's also emotional pain. It just felt like a struggle to get through life. And that kept happening. And with the medication, it kind of helped when I was on antidepressants. And I always used to go back to the doctor and say, this is not helping and that's not helping. And it did not, at that point of time, I was not able to get any sort of help. I couldn't convince my GP to believe me. And I tried to go to the hospital and ask for help. They sent me home with Tylenol. I tried to explain it to my husband. I tried to explain it to everybody. Nothing helped. I called the suicide hotline. I said, this is happening to me. And this is one time when I'm in so much pain. And I feel so alone that I don't know if I'll be able to resist the thoughts. And they said, tell me your plan. It is essentially, tell me your plan. And I broke down. That is when I broke down. I didn't know what else to do. Nobody believed me. And that led to me choosing to overdose and thinking, I just want this to end.
Mm. And then who found you? What happened?
My husband did. I overdosed on my migraine medication. It was the propranolol something. It was whatever medication I had. I wasn't thinking, and I don't remember. I don't remember what happened. I do know that my neighbor drove me to the hospital. This is during COVID. My daughter was again two and a half. So my neighbor has been godsend. She's now my best friend. She drove me to the hospital. All I remember is waking up there the next day evening, not knowing what had happened. And I was there for 2 days, and I still could not remember what had happened. And it's not that I couldn't believe that it had happened. It's not that I regretted it. I didn't feel anything. I just felt, well, I was not in pain for the past 24 hours. That's about it.
You know, I think a lot of people who are listening to this, myself included, can think of all the days that we spent kind of leading up to this and never actually got to the point of following through on some of the suicidal thoughts that we might have had. And I should just pause to say that if anybody is feeling that way, we're going to provide lots of resources. If this conversation is at all triggering for you, below the talk, so you have those accessible, and hopefully we'll get a better response than what you, Shruti, got when you called. And it sounded like the suicide hotline, you had access to it right there. You called the number and you didn't get the help that you needed at the time. So our hope is that everybody will get the help that they need from their local hotline. It's a tough situation to be in for sure. But I want to understand what really tipped you over the edge. What really made the difference this time? Because you were probably in a lot of pain leading up to that over and over again. What was it? What was the tipping point for you?
I didn't have anybody understanding me, one thing. And it was very hard for me to get through daily chores, right? Wash, cook, clean, take care of the dog, take care of my daughters. That was always something that my husband and I would fight about. And not just now, it's always been an issue. In India, we had a maid, we had help. We had, our family helping us. But whenever we've been on our own, and multiple times in the past, we've always thought about who does what. And it's very hard for a person to understand how a person can just be in bed and do nothing and say, I'm tired. So unless they have been through something like that. So that was always an issue. And I think at that point of time, he was also very stressed. I was very stressed. We were not able to communicate very well. And one of these issues, stupid issues, just came up. And it felt like he was saying, you don't do anything. Not that he said it, but for me, it felt like, someone's telling me that I'm not doing anything. And I didn't know how to explain that I can't do anything. I didn't feel like it was very hard to just drag myself off the bed and try and be functional in a day. And it was one of those fights which just tipped me off. And I think I knew for a week that I would somewhere get to that point, and I was asking for help in all kinds of ways, saying that I am going to hit this point, but nobody really thinks that you will. It's just something that happens during a fight. So nobody thinks that you will get to that point, and it just happened.
It sounds like you've been brushed off by the doctors and they've minimized your pain. You've been restricted. You had access restricted to treatments once you arrived. In the new country, and struggles at home, and it must have just felt like after decades of fighting and pushing through that you just didn't have the fight left in you.
I struggle with my thoughts all the time. I struggle with it. I always find a reason to live for today. So that's why I say one breath at a time. That's my mantra. It's not even one day at a time. It's just one breath at a time, because fighting that thought takes a lot. No idea why it's there. No idea what's happening in my head. No idea why I'm in pain. But I know that you shouldn't give in to it. There's no reason to. And so half the struggle is in fighting that particular thought and giving myself reasons to look forward to something today, right now, and look forward to something tomorrow. So at that point of time, I was incredibly exhausted and I didn't want to find any reason. So there's no meaning to this much pain. Nobody should have to live like this. Nobody should have to feel so alone. And if I'm feeling alone, does it mean I am alone? And if I am alone, then probably it wouldn't make a difference if I wasn't here. That was I actually had a rational thought process. I'm going to think about it.
Of course you did. But I think you also were, it sounds like you were going through a lot of change in a relatively short period of time. You got married, you wanted to get pregnant, you were struggling with migraine, you got pregnant, you had the baby, you're going in and out of jobs, and you move and then you go into a new country and a new culture with a new medical system. And you had all those things, and it probably wouldn't take too much to push somebody over the edge who was having those suicidal thoughts. And the sort of the cautionary tale, I think, for anybody who's listening is, if you're going through all those changes, your stress level is building up and up and up and up, and you've got to recognize that. And then, as you say, take a breath and step back. And I love that you raised your hand for help. I'm just so sad that no one was there for you at the time that you needed it, right?
Yeah, and it was COVID. It was the pandemic. It was the beginning of the pandemic, which kind of made it worse, because you can still get access somehow. I know that we have universal healthcare. We have to wait months to get an appointment with a specialist. We have to wait hours at the ER. But here we were not allowed to go to the ER unless we were actually emergent. I think that is what added more pressure, that I couldn't actually go actively and seek help and get a doctor to see me and see the state I was in. Because over the phone, everybody sounds fine. And I guess that was the stress.
Well, that sounds like a good advocacy platform. So nearly 1 in 4 people with migraine report feeling suicidal or engaging in self-harm. And I've had suicidal thoughts. You've had suicidal thoughts. That's like 2 of us on this call, at least, or in this conversation. As you've studied it, and I know you have, what are the most common reasons that you see that people feel this way?
The worst thing about migraine is the feeling of, I don't have anybody who relates to me. I don't have any support. I don't know if whatever I'm going through is valid. So the lack of validation causes so much isolation, which is what triggers it. That's one side of it. And at this side, it's just the brain. Like you said, the stress keeps building up. The brain is built to protect itself, right? It's built to help us survive. And when there's so much pain, it's very common for people with chronic pain to have suicidal thoughts, from what I've read, from what I've spoken to different doctors, because it's just the brain's way of protecting you and saying, okay, fine, you should stop. But when it says you should stop, it's not about you should die. It's about, maybe you should take a step back and figure out how to heal from this. But that's not what we usually hear.
Wow. I mean, what a story. I guess if not for the grace of God, that could have been you or me who took the next step to attempt suicide, right?
Yeah. I mean, there's been times where, I've been in a personally really, really dark place. And, it's kind of scary to think how close for every suicide attempt there is, how many others that are just absolutely near misses, that just a hair trigger could have been, enough to tip the scale.
Yeah, that's true. And I think there are many people in the community who are watching this today who are thinking, that could have been me. That could have been me. And ironically, if she hadn't attempted suicide, she might not be an advocate, a powerful advocate as she is today.
Yeah. And I think it's a good way to look at, constructively what happened, how to learn from it and make the best out of it. And I think Shruti's absolutely doing that. And I also think for people that are in that awful place right now that may be watching, that to recognize that the thoughts that we have under those circumstances are not rational and they're temporary, and that there is lots of things worth living for, and lots of struggles that people have conquered, and that there is hope for a better future.
Yeah, I have learned so much from the experts that we've interviewed on the Migraine World Summit about the relationship between migraine and mental health and what a delicate balance it is. Let's listen to a clip here from Professor Paul Martin about what he had to say about the importance of social support for mental health.
To be honest, I've done research on social support, and I've done it largely because I feel I can't escape from social support. Whatever I do, I sort of trip over it. There's so much evidence these days about how important it is. I mean, for example, the cardiologists accept that inadequate social support is as much a risk factor for heart disease as the three traditional ones of high blood pressure, high cholesterol, and cigarette smoking. The oncologists, many will say that if you have strong social support and you have terminal cancer, you live on average twice as long as if you have weak social support. It's a risk factor in my main research areas for headaches, but also postnatal depression. Exactly why it is, again, we're not quite sure. One model is that a lack of social support is inherently stressful. We need support from people around us. Another model is what we call the buffer model, which is having strong social support protects you against stress. But it takes many forms. There's emotional support, which is what most people think of support. That's the proverbial shoulder to cry on, if you like. There's informational support, people you can go to give you advice and information. But there's also belonging support, a sense that you're not an island, you're part of a family, part of a community. And there's esteem support, which is people who make you feel you have some value, some worth. And you need all those different forms of support.
You spoke earlier about having a photographic memory, which is pretty incredible and rare. And you also spoke about brain fog and memory. How has that formed part of your migraine experience?
I can't remember life before it. I just know the tests that I took and how I was before, but I don't know what happened that suddenly remembering if I flushed is a hard thing. Like I go back multiple times to check if I've turned off the stuff, if I've locked the door, if I've flushed, if I've returned a call, different things. I might be cooking and thinking about something and I don't know what I'm doing suddenly. And with memory, it's always been like brain fog. I was a kid who was so good with words. I always wanted to be a writer. And I used to write poetry, I used to write songs. And suddenly I couldn't think of words and I couldn't articulate myself well. I used to speak well. And even now I feel like I can't. And that's a part of being frog, not able to find the words, not able to remember things. I also have this problem where I'm writing, but I'm questioning the spelling of everything that I'm writing. And that is such a strange feeling. And it's a scary feeling because my confidence came from how good I was at certain things. And when suddenly that started fading, I just didn't know who I was anymore.
Yeah, I think a lot of people deal with cognitive impairment as a migraine attack is coming on in this sort of prodrome before they know that they're actually dealing with a migraine. And I think, why am I struggling with this? It's not clear. But there's also a couple of medications that actually create brain fog, right? You mentioned topiramate. That's been reported as an associated side effect for some people who use that. And so we need to take a look at the medications that we're on to see if we're compounding a problem that's making it harder to work or even function. As you say, flush the toilet, which is a really important thing on a daily basis. So that's good to know. You've written a lot on your social media accounts about trauma and childhood trauma and adult trauma and the subsequent PTSD from that. Can you share what elements of trauma have occurred in your life that you feel like have contributed to your mental health and potentially this suicide attempt?
Well, I'm still learning about it, so I can discuss whatever I have kind of recognized and realized and talked about with my therapist. I come from a very dysfunctional family. Again, this is a typical South Asian family where we have issues where if the husband and wife don't get along, they somehow still try and make it work for the kid because they think that's the best thing that they can do. But then my parents each had their own issues. They also had traumas, like generational trauma just passed down. And my dad also lived with mental health issues. And it was a very turbulent household where I clearly remember knowing that nobody in this house likes each other. And they are here together because of me. And if they are frustrated, they show it on me. But they love me too. I can feel that. My parents would never say no to anything that I wanted. But it was this feeling of, they're doing all this for me. My mom is alive for me. My dad is here for me. Whatever they're doing is for me. And so I am responsible for taking care of them. It comes naturally. I wanted to please them. I wanted to do anything and be the good kid. So despite all this, because they had issues, and it's very common in India to discipline a child by hitting them. My mother would get really frustrated and she'd just give me one tight slap or something like that. We'd always fight. The problem for me was I was a good kid and I'm very much aware of it. I did well in school. I never got into any trouble. My mom was my best friend. The only thing I do is ask questions about things that I'd like to know. So if they say, don't do this, I want to know why. So why shouldn't I do it? Give me a reason. So if that reason is logical, then I'll listen to you. If it's not logical, then it doesn't make sense for you to be even saying that. And that was sassy. So my mom was already frustrated and that would cause her to hit me or we'd have arguments and she'd say, you're rebelling, you are arrogant. And, she'd go and talk to her brothers and sisters about it. And they would come and advise me. And this was too much for me because I knew how my friends' families were and I knew how my friends were. They never got this kind of treatment at home. So I didn't know what I did to deserve it. So I think a part of all of it is I was such a good kid. So I don't get why I was treated this way. And I kept trying to figure out why. And I kept trying to do things that would probably stop that, and it didn't. And I think through life, I've always tried to please people and try to be good. And somehow it's just circumstance that I had relationships that ended up being abusive in ways, just emotionally abusive. I was attracted to narcissistic people, and that kind of just contributed to the trauma. So over and over again, it was just emotional trauma emotional abuse. And it still continues till today. It's just like a pattern that just keeps happening.
You know, we interviewed several doctors about this issue, what Shruti lived through. And Dr. Gretchen Tietjen addressed childhood trauma that can result in migraine later in life on the Migraine World Summit. Let's take a look.
If in adulthood, I think what happens is if people react differently to stress if they've had early life stress as compared to if they didn't and they just, were under a stressful situation. So we sometimes see things that seem like, rather typical stresses that just happen in adulthood, family problems, job problems, death of a loved one, have a more profound impact on things like migraine than if there had never been any of the childhood abuse. So, different people react differently to things.
That was really interesting what Dr. Tietjen had to say. And when I think about, generationally, generations, like particularly older generations, getting spanked when you were naughty was commonplace and probably considered best practice, I'm assuming. And it certainly wasn't frowned upon in the way that it is today. And with Shruti, she wasn't physically abused in any way. It was to do with the relationship between her parents, even though she was clearly felt love. And so I think it's one of those things where it probably requires a bit of self-reflection to understand whether there is any actual sort of trauma or sort of emotions that are affecting you without you sort of realizing it. I think it can be an incredibly subtle thing. One of the things that you've had is obviously an incredible experience, not necessarily a good one, but a remarkable one nonetheless. And as part of that, you've spoken to a lot of experts and health experts and mental health experts. What concepts or tips would you share with the audience who might also be struggling with migraine and mental health that you feel have helped you?
Primarily acceptance. Accepting that I have migraine. This is something that I'll be living with probably for the rest of my life. One, because of migraine, I have limitations. I need to admit this to myself that I have limitations and I need to structure my life around it. Again, if I don't do this, I will burn out. I will face a lot more mental health issues. The second is to, again, kind of show some love to yourself because your brain, all it's trying to do is protect you. It's just trying to protect you. So I see migraine also a manifestation of the brain trying to protect you. It can be screwed up. It can not make any sense. It can be completely dysfunctional, but it is, I know that it's trying to tell me that something's not right. And so acceptance is one thing. Second, just be loving towards yourself, know when to stop. We don't have to compete in any sort of race. We are not winning any contest by trying to get ahead or like trying to be better than someone else. We just need to live rather than survive every single day, struggle to survive. So it's just about whatever I speak about is about accepting this is life. So because once you do that, you will find ways to fall in love with life and try and create a life that you will fall in love with eventually. So it's just about showing your self-care. If someone falls down and meets with an accident, you're not going to ask them to run a sprint the next day or the next minute. Why do we do that when we live with migraine or mental health? We do that. We don't actually rest. We don't take a step back. We don't say, hey, the doctor asked me to rest my knee, so I'm going to stay in bed for a month. I think that's what we need to start doing.
Dr. Buse also addressed migraine and mental health in her interview.
Depression and anxiety are actually quite common with any chronic medical illness, and migraine is a chronic medical illness. We're finding from the AMPP study that the catastrophizing is associated with developing chronic migraine, and there's some other conditions, anxiety, depression, having had a traumatic life event, a stressful life event, being abused or maltreated as a child, head injury, medication overuse, and caffeine overuse are all associated with becoming chronic migraine. Well, here's the good news in those findings. The good news is that about 3/4 of what we found are things that we could modify, we could have some control over. And so these are all things we want to focus on in cognitive behavioral therapy. We want to learn to change our thinking patterns, not think so black and white, feel more hopeful and optimistic, take more control and feel more empowered. And those are ways of thinking that we really focus on in CBT for migraine.
We're very pleased that we met you, and it's funny you mentioned sort of the rationale for you getting help and you finding help online from somewhere, and then wanting to pay forward the help that you got to try and help other people. That was exactly the same reason for me, and I don't think that people watching need to make a decision to become full-time about migraine advocacy. I don't think that's that, but I think to the point that you made around speaking about what you're going through and sharing your experience, revealing what life is really like with migraine, that helps improve the understanding of what migraine is really like, the fact that it's so much more than a headache, and that things need to change, and that the level of care that a lot of people are receiving is unacceptably low, and something should be done about that. And that you have an important message to share, and I think one that will carry and encourage others to do the same as well. And with that, change can occur. So I think that's really important, and appreciate you coming on and sharing that.
Thank you. I hope we can all create a much more migraine-friendly world for, let's say, my daughter's generation, if not ours.
I really appreciate your work as an artist. And I've seen in your Instagram account how you create these really creative and original posts. So how does art help you cope with the chronic pain that you have?
I don't even know why it started. I really don't. I just wanted to find a way to communicate how I felt, because I found that the support I got online is what saved me. So I wanted to help save someone else. I don't know how it started, but it is incredibly healing for me, because whatever I put down is my form of acceptance. When I'm talking about this is happening to me, when I talk about the truths living with migraine or complex trauma, anything to do with mental health, I am telling myself, yes, it's happening. So I'm giving myself validation, and I'm healing through that.
It's also a form of advocacy, because you're sharing your story here right now, and you're also sharing your experience through Chronic Lima on your Instagram pages and in the other sort of channels that you have too. How has that helped you with migraine?
It has helped me understand it better. I think most of my experience comes from the bad part of it comes from not understanding what the disease entails, not understanding that medication can lead to mental health issues, not understanding that you shouldn't be taking medication for so many years. It can damage your kidneys or your mind, cause brain fog. So a lot of different aspects to it. I didn't know that the light sensitivity and the irritability actually came from migraine. So me advocating, just writing about it, that's how it started, helped me understand the disease and how to navigate life with it. And one thing became very clear after my suicide attempt and after me trying to find light in all of it. One thing became clear, that once I understand it, I'll be able to live better with it. And I can live. I don't have to just keep surviving day to day. So this is just me trying to find ways to live rather than live, thrive, not just survive.
Well, you're living well, and we so appreciate your advocacy. You're doing a great job online and encouraging so many other people. So I just want to thank you for your courage and for joining us today to share your traumatic experience with our community in an effort to help others avoid the same fate.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm incredibly grateful.
And thank you for all the work that you've done with the Migraine World Summit and for your work as an advocate. You've got a really important message to share that just might save someone else's life.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
All right, we're going to jump now to some Q&A. So if you've got some questions, we've got some time left to answer those with Shruti here. And thank you for your comments and observations that have already been coming through. We've been reading the chat as the interview was going, and there's some remarkable stories and even lessons from our own audience here. And one of them that I'll call out is from Zephy, who said that her advice would be just to always bring your loved ones to any appointments that you have with your neurologist or neurosurgeon, psychiatrist or psychologist, because it just helps them. I mean, it's for so many reasons that's great. One, it's you've got someone there to support what you're sharing, to help you sort of accurately recollect what has been happening and how you've been going, but also to help you remember what gets said and the advice that gets given as well. And you can perfectly understand how when you're in a consultation and you're tired, you're in pain, you've got side effects and brain fog from the medication, just how important it is to bring someone with you to those meetings. So great advice there from Zephy. And so thank you for sharing.
Yeah, I heard a number of great tips, things like invite your loved ones to come to some advocacy events, have them join your support groups. Couples counseling was suggested as an idea, because when migraine begins to, drive a wedge between you and your family members or you and your partner, the pain from it is really compounded. So that may not have been the obvious segue from Shruti's story, because we were talking a lot about mental health issues, but boy, I think this is pretty common. So I would love to hear from the community, if you could just kind of write in the chat whether you've experienced a mental health crisis related to migraine, or I guess I'll ask two questions. One is a mental health crisis, and then the other is, have you experienced a relationship crisis related to migraine? Because both of those really came up in this conversation.
And whilst people are doing that, there's another comment from Athena, who said that support groups have been really helpful for her, whether it's for pain or depression or anxiety or even domestic violence. It lets you know that you're not alone and that you're not the only one suffering. So thank you for sharing that as well, Athena.
Yeah, we also heard, about childhood trauma and PTSD as being a factor. We know from a lot of the research that's just coming out this year about people who have been in combat situations in the military are dealing with high levels of PTSD and then migraine after PTSD. And Dr. Don Buse discussed that as being something that can really increase the likelihood that you're going to have chronic migraine when you've got concussion or head injuries, that type of thing. So I'm interested to know if anybody in the community or who's engaged today has dealt with PTSD or childhood trauma that you feel comfortable sharing.
Another comment that came through from Melissa as well was about how she's had to be extremely frank with her own family and close friends, and that they're conversations that take place over a period of time, and usually people don't get it in just one conversation, but therapy and couples therapy has helped her immensely. And with regard to work, that's an ongoing challenge. It hasn't been an easy conversation to have at work. One thing that we can share about migraine at work is that the World Health Education Foundation, the nonprofit that's responsible for this webinar, is actually doing a migraine at work program. You can find out more information at migraineatwork.org. And I know that there are free virtual seminars for large employers for staff with an informational seminar, kind of like a lunch and learn that is available. So if you are at a workplace and having difficulty with migraine, you can let us know anonymously, or you can make it known to HR. You can go to HR and see whether they might be interested in having an outside expert speaker come in to talk about migraine at your workplace. So if that sounds something that's interesting for you, let us know. You can get in contact with us, either through replying to any of the emails that you've received about this webinar.
So following up on a couple of the questions, I need my glasses to see all the great comments that are coming in. I see that Karen Jean shared that she experienced a complete and absolute burnout last January, and afterward experienced separation. So this is when mental health then affects relationship health. So migraine health, mental health and relationship health, or maybe it's just not sequential, but all a big swirl. I see someone else had commented, Amanda had commented, divorce. And Kristen talked about her childhood trauma. So this is definitely going on. Isabel also had PTSD from childhood trauma. And so I see that, Shruti, so many people are dealing with issues that have been similar to what you have encountered. How does that make you feel as you're seeing this kind of affirmation from the community?
I want to cry. I've lost my voice. I want to actually cry because I can relate to all of them, and it's validating. It is supporting for me. Thank you all for sharing your stories. And the thing about therapy, I got all of my family members into therapy, so we all see the same therapist, and she's got everybody's side, and she's been helping all of us.
That's right.
Shruti, have you found that since you started involving your family, in particular your husband, with your care, how has that changed things at home? And is that something that you would encourage others to consider as well?
Absolutely. Whether it's your parent or your partner or anybody, a friend that you're living in with, your family, you should definitely involve them with your care. Take them to your doctor's appointments with you, or at least let them read through everything that you're going through. I share every piece of information with my husband, whether it's with mental health or migraine. He gets annoyed at times. That's how much information I bombard. But it helps them understand. And we also have very open conversations about how caregivers also go through something when they're taking care of us. So I have a monkey. Caregivers also kind of burn out. They can't do everything all the time. They are not able to understand. So he has helped me with that. And I just think it's about helping another person explain. Someone said you have to tell them repeatedly. It's not just repeatedly, it's in different ways they might understand. My husband understood only when he started having migraine, and that was very recent. So I guess it's just a constant battle or a constant journey.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if you find that this is the case with your family and friends, Shruti and Paula, but obviously I'm very passionate. We're all very passionate about migraine, and I talk quite a lot about migraine to my family and friends. And, do you imagine if they listen? Absolutely not. I have no credibility with the people that I know the most. And so bringing in these external sources and seeing credible doctors or institutions or organizations talking about migraine has been a big way to actually showcase. And so it's not just me who's, for the 15th time or 50th time saying the same thing about migraine. They're actually hearing it from someone that they trust. That's what changes, that's what changes sort of perceptions in many respects.
Well, Carl, you've been a witness to this because my spouse, who's also named Carl, very confusing, but he has been with us on advocacy events and when we're filming the Migraine World Summit, and he hears directly from the experts, and all of a sudden he understands the thing that has been this third party in our marriage for decades now. It's been really helpful. So the same kind of thing we hear from people who go to Capitol Hill in the U.S., or they go to Miles for Migraine events or other advocacy events in different cities, is the minute they hear it from that other third party, somehow it becomes so much more legitimate. So anybody who's feeling that kind of strain, even if you don't feel it or see it, I promise you, it's time well spent if you can get them engaged in that. Yeah.
Yeah. I think as well that there's been a theme of going to the health professional for help and not getting it, and the health professional sometimes being part of the problem. And it's a real challenge, particularly for people that don't have a lot of choice with doctors. If you're in a rural area or a remote area, and for those of us who are in cities, metropolitan areas, even we often stay with doctors who are unconstructive or unhelpful for perhaps longer than we should. Migraine is getting to the point now where education is improving all the time, and that's cascading slowly down to GPs, but it's still slowly. And so if you're not getting the help that you think you need or deserve, it's like going to the hairdresser and getting a bad haircut. We'd never go back to that person. Yet with doctors, we keep going back and back to the same person. And we have the choice. We're their boss. We're hiring them to help us. So if we do have the luxury of choice, or if we do have telemedicine alternatives, that's something that I would consider to make sure that you get the care that you need, so that you can then take your partner or your parent or caregiver to them and help them explain exactly what's going on, and then you can get sort of the support at home as well. I think that can make a big difference.
Yeah. If I may, I think for me, it made a difference. I flew back to India last year in November. That's when I got into therapy. I also consulted doctors from all fields for everything and took my husband along with me. So I have this best of both worlds situation going on, where if the medical system here fails me, I have the one in India to back me up. And I still consult with them over videos, and that's really helped me as well. So just go get help from wherever you can.
Yeah, and I think we each have a role to play in this. For people who are on, and I recognize some of the names who are here in the chat who are also involved in the advocacy space. I've been pulled into conversations between couples and within families where somebody really just wants their husband or wife to understand what they're going through, or their sister or their parent. Would you please talk to this person and tell them that migraine is real? And so I think we each have those opportunities in our lives, and sometimes we're making a difference one at a time by simply legitimizing a disease that people will often trivialize or or associate inappropriately with mental health. So one person in the chat made a comment about part of the problem is calling migraines mental health, is that abusers take that to mean that we're crazy and imagining our symptoms. We are not calling migraine a mental health issue. We are saying that mental health challenges oftentimes are correlated with migraine, and that compounds the burden that people feel. But they are two separate and distinct issues, health issues. Migraine has several comorbidities, like sleep in migraine, is a common comorbidity, or allodynia and migraine, common comorbidity, gut problems, right? We deal with all these things, but they're not the same thing. So just to be clear about that.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of liken it to, torture. When you have chronic migraine, you have chronic pain. And that is, essentially a form of torture. And if there's no relief inside, if there's unpredictable attacks, and particularly acute and disabling attacks, like everyone who is tortured, you break eventually. Some people may break later than others, but that has an impact psychologically on every individual. And when I spoke to Professor Dawn Buse about this in the Migraine World Summit, she gave me this permission to say, that's okay, Carl. Like, that's a normal human response to a very difficult situation when you're under extreme duress. So adding additional shame or guilt about feeling depressed because you have a very difficult condition only adds fuel to the fire. But I think if you know that that's a normal human response, and you're able to seek help about that as well, then that's a really positive thing. But I know that a lot of people were like I was, where you feel this additional shame and guilt on top of the psychological torment, on top of the painful torture that you're experiencing with chronic migraine. And it just all cascades, and it can be very, very difficult. And it's no surprise why it takes such a toll on us in so many different ways. Shruti, I want to say thank you to you. We are out of time. Thank you so much for sharing your deeply personal story. It takes a lot of courage to come out and talk about this, but it's so important for others to hear your story and to learn from your experience. And you've been very generous and so forthright with your experience. So thank you very much for that. We wanted to thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. And thank you, everybody, for sharing your stories as well. Take
We
care
are
of your
great-
brains, okay?
Yeah, we're grateful for you joining us here. We're grateful for your work on the Migraine World Summit, and we're grateful for your advocacy in the community. And you just keep going, girl. You're doing some great stuff.
Thank you so much.
Thank you everyone for joining us, and have a good night or a good morning, depending on where you are. But bye-bye for now.
All right. Take care. Bye.
Thanks for joining us on Me versus Migraine. If you have a story that might help others, we'd love to hear it. Just send us an email from our website at worldhealtheducation.org. And feel free to share this resource with others.
And this episode was produced by the World Health Education Foundation in association with Migraine World Summit. Robin Rock, Lydia Evans, and our guest, Shruti, all contributed to the production, so we thank them. And thank you, Carl, for joining me on Me versus Migraine. I'm Paula K. Dumas, wishing you strength for your battle with migraine.